Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Ocean State Current Command Bunker. Now playing from in the dugout, number 37, Mike Stenhouse.
A follow-up to a couple of contentious meetings, one at Charahoe that we covered yesterday on my Sten React segment, and one last night in Barrington, where our good friend Dr. Andrew Bostom made a presentation that caused quite a stir. Hey, welcome to In the Dugout. Your host, Mike Stenhouse here. Coming up in just a second, we're going to have Greg Piccirilli on. He's been on many times before. He's been one of those brave lawyers that's represented people who were wronged during the COVID. And we're going to have him analyze some of the legal questions that came up in my Sten Reacts segment that I brought up and that came up in Tuesday's Charahoe meeting, where Republicans seized control and resisted the what we refer to as bullying efforts down there in Charahoe to take control. And then Andy Bostom himself is going to be coming up a little bit later in the show, the main part of today's show, to talk about this also very contentious meeting, a presentation he made. And as you can imagine, if you're talking about anti-Semitism, there's always another side to that. And some of those people on the other side got quite loud, and it got a little testy. So we'll talk to Andy. We'll show you some video from that. But right now, let's welcome back our good friend. And we can see he's playing ball with us. He's got a cap on. Greg Piccirilli, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Thanks, Mike. Good to see you again.
Now, what cap you got on there?
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Oh, no. Seriously? Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Everybody who watches this show knows that I'm a Green Bay Packers fan, and there's a good chance we're going to be playing you in the playoffs this year. There's a decent chance that you will face you in the first round. So
yeah, I think we beat you. I think we beat you back in 2020 when we won our Super Bowl.
Yeah, under Brady, right?
Yep.
Yep. That was a tough game for us. A tough game. All right, let's get on to it. So Greg, first of all, you are couple of things. You are a member of our Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity's legal team. We're putting together and hoping to make an announcement early next year, but you're going to be part of that team. Thank you for being that. But you're also a private attorney. We know with all the lawsuits you've been conducting on behalf of those wronged, for other reasons, but mostly on this show, those wronged by COVID mandates. And you're also the solicitor for the Gloucester and Foster Gloucester school committees.
Yes.
You ever get any free time? All right.
I'm here with you, Mike.
So it was a school committee meeting that I did my Sten Reacts to yesterday from Tuesday night's meeting. And there were some school committee legal questions that came up that we want to run by you. So if that's okay, let's get going. Okay.
Absolutely.
If you recall, I'll set it quickly. There was a new session. The newly voted members to the Charahoe School Committee are in. The Republicans or the Conservatives have a 7-5 advantage. The left-leaning chair, there was a motion to reelect her as chair. That motion was killed. It failed. It did not win. Then there was a motion to say, let's put off all other votes on chairman and other officers and subcommittee members until our January meeting, because there's a new person who is about to be appointed because of a resignation, even since the election. The superintendent, Greg, you've seen the video. We're going to play it for our folks right here. Very, very firmly tried to say, if you do that, you're breaking the law. Let's look at that, Greg, video, and then you tell me your thoughts on that. This is Charahoe School Superintendent Gina Picard in reaction to the motion to put off the election of chair and officers until next month.
As well as have their vote included.
Thank you. I just want to be clear that the Charahoe Act is law. And at this point, as school committee members, if you choose to break the state law, you would no longer be indemnified as school committee members and have to get your own attorneys. If so, someone should move forward to file a lawsuit. I just need to make that clear, that any acts to violate the Charahoe Act is a violation of law. And again, you will not be indemnified as school committee members.
All right, Greg. She's speaking like she knows what she's talking about there. Isn't that clear?
If I were one of the committee members, I would have asked her, what lawyer gave you this advice? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. Um, there is a Charahoe Act. There are also state laws governing the appointment of school committee chairpersons. I think they just had a big lawsuit, went to the Supreme Court over whether a state law or a local charter, and it's not an easy answer. It's a very complicated answer. As I remember Joe Larissa argued that case
Yep.
for one of the members. I mean, I was present at that oral argument on another case, and it was a split decision of the Supreme Court too. It wasn't a
Right.
unanimous decision. So it's not an easy answer. But to make a comment like that, where you're saying that someone's going to sue and you're not going to get indemnified, that doesn't even make sense. And who's going to sue? Sue for what? I just
All right.
there's no
Apart
logic
from
to it.
we'll get to the indemnification part in a second, but are they now this meeting itself happened 10 days. She was saying the chair people have to be elected within 10 days after, this whatever, the appointment of the new people. Well, this meeting itself was well after 10 days, so they've already broken the law by having this meeting 10 days afterwards. Did they, but whether forget indemnification for now, did they break state law?
Well, Mike, there is a statute in Rhode Island. It's a general law that applies to all school committees. In my opinion, would supersede the charter, the Charahoe Charter, that requires every school committee to have a chairperson and a clerk. It's a 16-2
At all times.
and at all times, and that because that person is the one who has authorization to sign documents and other things as the authorized chairperson of the committee. And this issue came up in Gloucester for me 25 years ago. I remember like Charahoe, we had an even number of members, 6 members on the Gloucester committee. I think Charahoe is 12.
Yep.
And it was after an election, and there was an existing chairperson that 3 of the members didn't want, but 3 of them did. And it was a tie vote. What do we do? And I had given a legal opinion back then that said under 1626, the current chairperson remains in that position until a new chair is elected. And if this meeting took place in December and the new committee doesn't even get seated to January, it's curious to me why they
No,
were
the
even
new
having
committee
it.
is seated. The new committee is seated.
Yeah, I mean, why would they be having no? But as I understand it, okay, I'm sorry, they were seated in
Yeah,
December.
newly elected members are on that committee right there.
But in any event, and my guess is that the current chair continued in that role during the rest of that meeting, which would be the rule. I mean, you just continue in your role as chairperson until
All right, so
until
did
new
they?
chair is
So
appointed.
was there a law broken? I mean, is the Charahoe Act law? I mean, I'm just trying to get. Was she correct in saying you're breaking the law?
Well, yeah, the Charahoe Act is a law, but it's just one law. And as I said, there's an existing state law which I think would be governing it over. And again, I'm not that
All right.
familiar with the Charahoe
So
Act.
it's a conflict
If
of the
there's a
two.
10-day rule, I mean, I don't think there's a penalty for not complying with it in the 10 days. I mean, there's not, the
All right.
Charahoe Charter Police aren't going to come in and start arresting people. It just doesn't make any sense.
So
You
it's so the point being, it's really not that clear, right? She's saying it is clear, right?
What
It
I
really
think is
isn't that
what
clear.
I think is clear is that it's not a question of breaking laws or anything. The issue is the current chair serves at the pleasure of the remainder of the committee. That's by state law. That governs over any
Okay.
inconsistent charter provision.
Okay.
And it's a very simple, it happens all the time. There's nothing unique about this. If there's a dispute over a new chair, the current chair continues in that role until a new chair is appointed. And
So
that's
it's
the end of
resolved.
it. There's nothing else to debate or threaten
Okay.
people about. It's just, I think that's a really unfortunate. And like I said, if I were on that committee, I'd want to know who gave her that legal advice.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about that I'll ask you about that at the
Yeah,
end because
yeah.
there's a lot of advice that seems to be missing here. All right. Now, what about this indemnification thing? If you break the Charahoe Act, does that put those people who voted for it at more risk of personal liability if somebody were to sue the committee?
Again, I say sue for what? Indemnity of what? What is who is going to sue? Who's going to make what claim would anybody even make? It doesn't make sense. That's not the purpose of when you have a charter provision or any state law that says, you have to have a chairperson. that's a practical legal, that's a procedural thing for the committee. It doesn't give independent people rights to sue people. It is illogical to me, where that goes. I just don't understand it. And I think it's just, it's a curious thing to make it for a non-attorney, especially a superintendent, to make a comment like that, without someone asking,
All
where is
right.
the legal opinion? What exactly is the legal opinion you're resting on?
I think you bring up a very interesting point here, because my initial reaction, this was just a superintendent bullying people, trying to scare them into not going along with the motion to delay the vote, speaking out of hand. But now that you mention it, she probably did get advice, because as I think back to the way this committee hearing unfolded, before they took the vote on the chair, she read the law. She read it like, I'm gonna come back to this. So yeah, somebody said, yeah, here it is. So she did get advice with somebody, and you're right. I think it needs to be found out who was advising her. Was it the official solicitor, John Anderson, who wasn't at that meeting? I'll ask you about that later. Or was it somebody else? All right. Next issue. There was a kind of a wild accusation made that it sounds like the Republicans here have violated open meetings regulations by colluding and deciding something ahead of time. There was no evidence produced, but I don't want to make it apply to Charahoe. I just want to talk generally. If two or three, if only two or three committee members talk and say, look, I'm going to put in this motion, would appreciate if you would second it so we could have discussion and a vote. And it's not a quorum. It's not a rolling quorum where effectively a quorum, in this case, 7 would be reached. Is 2 or 3 people talking about a motion one of them might file? Is that an Open Meetings Act violation?
No. The concept's called a rolling quorum. There are some cases from the Attorney General. It's quite a few, actually. Interestingly, it's never gone to court. There's never been a court case. This is all by Attorney General opinion. So it's kind of, it may be still a little unsettled whether there is such a thing as a rolling quorum. But essentially, if you have a committee of 12, then the quorum is 7. It has to be more than the majority.
Right.
So you'd have to, but a rolling quorum isn't just people talking to each other. If 7 members of the committee get together and have dinner, and all they talk about is the weather, they're not talking about public business. So there's a number of factors. But even if you talk about public business, there's actually a case right on point. I think it was in Portsmouth maybe 10 years ago, where there was a talk about a new chairperson. And 3 members of the committee talked. It was a 7-member committee. 3 of them said, hey, we want you as the chair. And they did that. Well, where they went wrong is they asked a 4th person. Now, if they just said to the 4th person, and the Attorney General makes this clear, because it has to be a collective discussion to make a decision outside of a public meeting. So if they went to the 4th member and said, hey, I'm going to be running, I hope I have your support, and the person says, I will consider it, that's not a violation.
Okay.
If you go to that 4th member and say, I have 3 votes, do I have your 4th vote? And the person says, yes, you have my 4th vote, that's the violation.
Right.
But they can have this discussion. Now, if the person who wanted it, otherwise, how would government function, quite frankly?
Right.
If you want to be the chairperson and you approach 6 different members and say, hey, would you support me? And the person, I'm hoping for your
Got it.
support. And the person says, okay, I will consider it. Thank you for letting me know you're going to be running.
Got it.
That's perfectly appropriate.
So as long as no decision is made to act in
as long
a
as
quorum way. But just back to my question, under no circumstance, though, would just 2 or 3 people coordinating activities be a violation?
No, if 6 members of that committee could get together and say, we're going to do this, and that's not a violation.
All right, got it. All right, now I'm going to go back to the issue you raised about state law, about there always must be a chair. There never can be a vacancy for chair. So Karen Reynolds, the incoming chair, was voted down. But she wasn't voted out, but she was voted down to be the chair prospectively, forward thinking. So by that state law, for all intents and purposes, up until the next meeting, whatever happens at the next meeting, from Tuesday night until January 14th, when it's scheduled, she is still the chair by state law, right?
As I said, that's been my interpretation of the law for over 25 years, and that's how I advise committees, because the law, it's like a rule of continuity. The law abhors a vacuum. You can't have a situation where a position is vacant like that. So the person has to remain until their
Got it.
successor is appointed.
Got it. Perfect. And that's state law, and that supersedes
And I
anything.
think it's a state law. It's been around a long
Okay.
time.
Okay.
It goes back to the original 1800s laws. It's been I think that law would supersede any charter inconsistent with that.
All right. One last question for you, and I know you have to be careful in making editorial comments about any fellow solicitor on some other school committee because you serve on Gloucester and Foster Gloucester. But at this Charahoe School Committee meeting, their solicitor, John Anderson, was not there. Now, look, it shouldn't be hard to imagine that a Democrat-controlled committee prior to the November elections that has now swung to be with a Republican majority, and there's elections of officers. There was, these are very contentious meetings, among the two sides, as you all. I mean, it wouldn't be hard to anticipate that there might be a lot of questions and issues raised, and if there was ever a meeting a solicitor should be at, it would be this one. But yet, the solicitor was not present. He didn't send any surrogate that was there. Is this unusual in any way?
It's hard to say. Some committees, the lawyers are always present. Other committees operate where the lawyer's only present for when there's something important, legal matter to discuss. There have been times where I haven't gone to meetings where it's a new committee and all they're doing is appointing new members if it's not controversial or anything like that. But and so I have no idea why he wasn't there.
Would it be normal if the main person can't send? Is there normal a backup like
I would imagine if he didn't go, it wasn't because there wasn't. I don't know. Maybe, but if they wanted someone there, John works for one of the bigger firms and there's plenty of lawyers in his firm that do education law that could have gone. But so I don't know.
I'm just asking generally, is there usually a backup solicitor in case the one can't come?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just use this speculation, and this is pure speculation.
Okay.
But I've had situations that in my professional career where this has happened. People ask you for your legal advice. They don't like your legal advice. It may not be the advice that it may not be the point you're trying to put forward. And then they may not want you around if the question comes up, they might not want you there to answer it. So
just connecting the dots, and this is speculation, and then we'll end it with this, Greg. So you said it appears, well, you didn't quite say it. You wondered if Gina Picard, the superintendent, who was apparently speaking out of hand here, who was not accurate in the way she was making such clear statements. It does appear as if she received some legal advice on how to position this and how to try to come out strong on this. And if that was the solicitor, John Anderson, who gave her that advice outside of the meeting and yet then didn't show up at that meeting, that seems a little unethical. I would be
shocked. I know John, I've worked with John a long time. We haven't always agreed on things, but I would be shocked if John had given her that advice.
Okay.
And quite frankly, and more importantly, why is the superintendent making that point? And that would be like me being at a school committee meeting and starting to tell people, start telling the superintendent, how they should, what curriculum they should be adopting. It's not my role. And I don't see why the superintendent has no role at all in the election of chairperson. That is solely a function of the committee members. There was no reason for her to even open her mouth on the topic.
Wow.
It doesn't, I've never seen that where a superintendent has injected themselves into a purely committee political issue that is a completely inappropriate role for a superintendent to get involved in.
Well, as I commented on my Sten Reacts yesterday, I think it's easy. Yes, while it's unusual, probably unethical. Look, you've got a school committee just flipped from a woke left to a conservative majority school committee, and those on the left are absolutely panicked. They can't believe they just witnessed at that meeting. They know it's all coming in January, that they're going to be out of power. They're not in power anymore, and they're panicked. And I think that's why they resign. That's my commentary. I don't need you to talk on that. Let me do the political commentary. You stick to
That's
the
not my
legal.
role, right?
I know that's not your role. That's right. It's my role to be a commentator on that. All right, Greg Piccirilli, that's all we need for today. Hey, Merry Christmas, Happy
Merry
New Year.
Christmas.
We'll look forward to following up with you in January. Thanks,
Thank you
Greg.
very much. Have a happy new year too. Bye.
All right, and let's now move on to the main segment of today's show. The very contentious presentation by our good friend Dr. Andrew Bostom in Barrington last night, just presenting data on anti-Semitism across the globe. A data presentation. Wait till you see what happened and hear their reaction to what happened at that meeting last night. All right, so before I bring on Andy Boston, I got to do my hat switch back and go back to my in the dugout mode. Enough of the Green Bay Packers for now, even though they're going to win the Super Bowl. Okay, Andy Boston, welcome back to In the Dugout.
Good to be with you, Mike.
You know, most of our fans and viewers know you as the medical researcher and a former epidemiologist, clinical epidemiologist, who did the research on a lot of the COVID-related mandates and prescriptions, from the vaccine to the school mask. And you were among the first in the country to publicly say, the data isn't adding up. And of course, when you go against the government narrative, you get criticized, we got criticized, you got criticized. We are all proven right. Flash forward, you're also an author. You've studied Islamic jihadism. You've also researched data on anti-Semitism since the October 7th, 2023 attacks. And you did a presentation in Barrington last night. Tell us a little bit first, what was the purpose, without getting into the data, what was the purpose and why did you want to do a presentation on this matter?
Yeah, so not only have I been studying Islam for the last almost 25 years now, I've been looking as an epidemiologist at anti-Semitism data for at least the last 20 years or so, and the two areas of interest that's just unfortunately overlapped because it's very consistent when you look at ADL data, when you look at European
Anti-Defamation League.
Anti-Defamation League data. Remember, ADL is decidedly left. When you look at academic surveys in Europe, even a Middle East Muslim think tank out of Doha, what becomes quite apparent is that certainly in the last quarter century, if not longer, the most common and the most virulent form of anti-Semitism comes from the Muslim world, or now travels with Muslims that live in the so-called Muslim diaspora in both Europe and the United States. And it's a very consistent phenomenon. And yet, because of issues that have to do with cultural relativism and political correctness, it's rarely discussed. It's not even discussed, Mike, quantitatively. In other words, the dry data are not discussed, even though ADL puts the data out in some form. When it issues press releases about what these surveys actually show, it downplays its own findings. The academic surveys, they're academic surveys. Most of the public doesn't care about academic surveys. But it's remarkably so.
Okay.
It leaves a sense of disorientation in the Jewish community. And that's what I really wanted to address last night.
All right. So why did you, I'm just curious. There's no negative here question, but why Barrington? Why the week before Christmas? What was,
Right.
talk about that.
It worked out because very courageous Lisa Daft of the Barrington Town Republican Committee and I had been corresponding for about a year, since October.
Oh, okay.
7th. And she finally, had an opening or an interest also in sponsoring something at the beautiful Barrington Library Auditorium. And we decided.
She invited you to present?
Pardon?
She invited you to present?
Yeah, we had been talking about maybe doing something on and off for almost a year, and this turned out to be a good time for her, and we thought we could squeeze it in before Christmas, Hanukkah, and we decided to just go for it.
By the way, happy Hanukkah to you.
And Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right. So we had you on earlier this year to talk about some of your early findings on anti-Semitic data based on surveys and polling and whatever else goes on, both in America and in other countries. And again, you have researched this, right? You have looked at the studies, you have looked at the surveys that have been published, and you put and basically your presentation last night was simply to present this data to the audience.
And some updated
Yep.
findings too. Even some, I didn't send you the slides, Mike, but very quickly, we saw this explosion of campus anti-Semitism, certainly spring, bleeding over even into the fall. And Brandeis did a survey, a very courageous survey. Actually, most of it was done last spring. And they asked very similar questions to what the ADL asks in its anti-Semitism surveys. And once again, the salient finding was that when they had information on religious affiliation of the students, they surveyed about 3,800 students across 60 colleges and universities, that once again, Muslims were about 2.6-fold more likely to harbor extreme anti-Semitism than Christians, for example, as a reference population.
All right. Before we look at some of the data, we're not going to go through your whole presentation, just a few minutes to summarize your data, but I want to set it up this way. Before your event, there was a rabbi of all people who, for reasons that were completely shot down in an open letter by an attorney, tried to accuse you of fear-mongering and hate speech and all that, even before you presented, even before he knew what you were going to say. And then after your presentation during the question and answer period, there was some pretty contentious, they weren't even questions that people were trying to pontificate up there. So we'll get into that in a second. But I just want to show people, if you go to oceanstatecurrent.com, we have a column, and we're going to add this video. We're going to add the full Q&A session from last night to this string, but we've been updating this story. There was this open letter that was in response to Rabbi Altman. Here's Rabbi Altman's letter was there. So there's a lot right there on oceanstatecurrent.com. So there's a lot of controversy your presentation caused before and after. But let me ask you this before we look at the data.
By the way, Rabbi Voss Altman apparently did not show up, despite all
he said he was going to, right?
Despite all his huffing and puffing, and no one saw him there.
At least not that you know. Okay. All right. We're going to look at that in just a second. But did you last night in Barrington? Did you simply present the data, or did you add a lot of editorial, subjective commentary about Islam or Jewish or whatever?
No. I presented the data, and actually the only I ended with what I thought was a positive message, which is that these data indicate, last week, Mike, the American Jewish Committee and the Council of Catholic Bishops, the National Council of Catholic Bishops, reissued a little like a PDF on anti-Semitism, and they reaffirmed 60 years of the Nostra Aetate Vatican II process, which will be coming up in 2025. It will be 60th anniversary. And they put together a glossary on anti-Semitic terms with basically Catholic glosses on why these expressions, these tropes are anti-Semitic from a Catholic perspective. And so it's a remarkable process. It's a long process. It's 60 years now. But all I was asking for at the end of the lecture, after presenting the data and the doctrine, I spent a lot of time on the doctrine, is that it cries out for a Vatican II-like series of reforms of Islamic teaching institutions.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So that's just a hardly hate speech, right? Okay,
No.
Let's take a look at some of the data again. I mean, in summary, in America and across the world, especially, the views, anti-Semitic views, are just kind of stunning. So take us through.
Well, let me quickly contextualize this. So the ADL has this very simple survey instrument. They confront the respondent with 11 anti-Semitic stereotypes. If you agree with at least 6 out of them, you become an index case of extreme anti-Semitism. Then they simply tally how common is that extreme anti-Semitism in any given population. So this is from 100 countries in the world, and the 16 most anti-Semitic countries, where you can see the prevalence of this degree of anti-Semitism is anywhere from 74 to 93%, are all in the Middle East and North Africa. And if you show another slide, which looks at things globally, this is just the entire 100 countries. And once again, that larger column, much larger column on the left, is Muslims from any country versus Christians, those who don't profess the religion, Hindus and Buddhists across the world. And it's anywhere from 2 to 3-fold more common amongst Muslims.
Okay, so Christians, 24% of Christians meet that 6 out of 10 marker, for instance, and 49% of Muslims worldwide meet that marker.
That's right.
Okay.
That's
And
right.
Buddhists would be the least of the major religions. All right.
In that survey. Now, this is post-October 7th data, because I was trying to show, and you'll see whatever, if you show the person who, whatever, objected my presentation, a so-called a university professor, if you show that clip later, what I pointed out to her are these are data from not the ADL, these are data from a very respected Muslim think tank in Doha, an academic think tank in Doha, Qatar. And what they're showing is that this extraordinary percentage in aggregate, 88%, again, of Middle East, North African Muslims, and there were 500 from each of these countries, believed that the carnage that Hamas committed on October 7th was a legitimate resistance operation. And then the last slide shows that.
So wait a minute. So the difference between this slide and the first slide, this is by country. This one is by Muslims within that country.
They're all these countries are all Muslim. They're essentially all Muslim, and these are all Muslim samples. One is the earlier data from 2014 are ADL data, and they're simply asking these questions about anti-Semitism.
Oh, this was 2014. All right, I get it.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
But actually, there's a striking concordance 10 years apart. But this is from a Muslim think tank, and they're asking about the carnage that took place on October 7th, and these extraordinarily high numbers of Muslims from these countries representing, they represent about 320 million people when you add up these countries. The 88% of them were saying that was a legitimate resistance operation in aggregate, and 89% of them don't believe Israel has a right to exist.
All right, so as we look at these kind of stunning numbers, just out of curiosity, where is America on this list? Do you know?
No, this was just a survey of the Middle East and North Africa. But if you were to ask a question like this in the United States, I have some Canadian data. The rejection of Israel's right to exist was maybe 10%. It's not absent.
All right, So here we see in this one, I like this chart the best. Muslims more than 2 times more likely to be anti-Semitic than other religions. Now, you studied Islam. I mean, that really shouldn't. I mean, the number might be extraordinarily high, but that really shouldn't come as a surprise given the tensions between Islam and Judaism over the centuries, should it?
Well, it's interesting you should say that. So people are quick to say that it's only because of the modern era. Go back wherever you want to go. Go back to 1947, 1948. It's only because of the modern era conflict in the Middle East around the establishment of Israel. But what you can see is that there's an ancient theology that goes back literally to the founding of Islam. And I talked a little bit about an early observation as early, as the 9th century, where a Muslim ruler in Baghdad was concerned about the fact that his population was virulently anti-Semitic. And it's not that he minded that. It's just that they were surrounded by powerful Christian kingdoms. So he literally hired a polemicist to write an anti-Christian screed because the Jews were crushed and defenseless, and they weren't a political threat. But yet he was surrounded by the Armenian Christian kingdom, the Byzantine Christian kingdom. But he had to hire a polemicist to gin up more anti-Christian hatred. And the polemicists noticed that, well, I think it's coming from the Quran, why the attitude towards the Jews was so negative, and also from the history of Muhammad's interactions, with the founding of Islam and the Jewish community. But the point is that this is not a new phenomenon, Mike.
All right. All right, let's move on from the data, which I think we all understand it. This is a problem. Of course, we've seen it manifest here in America as well. Like you said, in our universities, we've seen it on the streets. We've seen it at this state house. Even we see it in our own General Assembly, right? We see it.
We've even seen it, Mike. Real quick, there was one time the ADL, and it's old data, so it's probably worse if anything now. In 2017, they applied that survey. And it's much better in this country. 34% of Muslims at that time had exhibited extreme anti-Semitism versus only 14% of non-Muslims in the United States. So again, it's right in that area of 2 to 4-fold larger.
Now, one point that I've heard you say before, in America, in Muslim mosques in America, these views, these anti-Semitic views don't just exist. Some of the radical clerics are actually teaching it, are they not?
Oh, what I showed in the talk is that certainly if we look at focus post October 7th, is that the Middle East Media Research Institute had by the way, a moderate Muslim, review hundreds of sermons, and he could not find a single condemnation of Hamas's atrocities on October 7th. But he found myriad examples of using all these anti-Semitic themes from the Quran itself, from the traditions of Muhammad, to preach the same sort of hatred that you might see in the Middle East in the United States.
Wow. All right. All right. Let's get into some of the controversy that preceded and postceded if that's the right way to say it. Is postceded, is that a right term?
Succeeded.
Okay. You're the linguist. In fact, you used the word earlier, diaspora. What is that?
Oh, so
two diverging viewpoints?
No. In not coming, in other words, not the Muslims who moved to the West or moved to the United States or something like that, as opposed to the Muslims who were indigenous to the Middle East.
Oh, okay. All right.
So they're expatriate community, basically.
All right. Let's go. So again, if you go to oceanstatecurrent.com, you can read it in full. So the controversy started last week after your event was announced that it would be happening last night, Wednesday, December 17th. Last weekend, I believe last Friday night, you were forwarded an email that the organizer, Lisa Daft, and by the way, we invited Lisa to be on today, but she had so many commitments. She might jump on here in the end, I don't know, but she's got work commitments and things, so it's too bad. But she got a pretty nasty email from a rabbi from apparently a synagogue in Barrington.
Yeah.
And he really ripped you. I mean, he's calling you hate speech and fear mongering and anti-Islam and all that. And the letter kind of shook everybody up a little bit, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it improved the attendance, actually. According to Lisa, she got a lot of complaints from Jews who objected to this kind of ridiculous characterization. And also, Mike, I mean, you can
did you do hateful views that intend to demonize a religious minority in Barrington?
No, I just held up a mirror to what's actually being said and what the polling data show and why the polling data are predicted by what's being taught.
He goes into the white supremacist thing. He quotes the Charlottesville myth. I mean, this guy obviously suffers from Trump derangement syndrome, and he was projecting it all onto you.
Well, but also there was a horrific attack in Pittsburgh, and actually, I remember at the time I was one of the people that downloaded this Nazis manifesto, and it was horrific, and I commented about it at the time, but it was really a one-off. What the rabbi apparently didn't know is that between 9/11 and the end of December 2019, so the end of 2019, there were 6 completed attacks on Jewish institutions by Muslims that killed 8 and seriously wounded 7, and there were 16 additional attacks that were thwarted by law enforcement. So, you know, this was a horrific one-off, what happened at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh. But it really he ignored all the jihadism, the violent jihadism coming from the Muslim community in the United States.
What heinous views did you put forth last night?
Yeah, hey, it's almost. Why don't you pronounce it the way it was pronounced in My Cousin Vinny? You know,
Yeah,
remember
that's
that?
what I did. Hyenas. That's why I said it. Yeah.
None. I mean, it's ridiculous. You know,
All right.
I again, it was a very dry presentation, basically.
All right. Then there came, and apparently Lisa Daffy, or it was, even might have, even through my sources, said she might have been intimidated. Maybe we should cancel the event, but thankfully she did not, and you were able to do it. Now this Karen Hurwitz then wrote a open letter in response, basically countering and shooting down all the myths, all the stuff that the rabbi said about you. So just your comments on that. Do you know who this Karen Hurwitz is?
Yeah. I think I've met her at a talk I gave in early 2020, right before the pandemic, in the Boston area. You know, and she's written a lot of very thoughtful things. This was just a quick note that she put out to the Rhode Island Coalition for Israel.
Dr. Bostom is an immensely respected physician and scholar. His work is painstakingly documented. You did that with the COVID related items. You've done it here with anti-Semitism data from around the world. You go to great care to put together your research.
Well, I mean and it's ongoing. I mean, I'm actually working on a translation of just a very difficult to read 759-page PhD thesis from one of the late grand imams of Al Azhar University, and it's called the Jews and the Quran and Traditions. It translates into English, and it's been very difficult. I'm working with a Coptic Christian academic translator, an Arabic linguist. And he had real difficulty with the first chapter because he said he'd never seen anything so hateful. And now he's used to it. So he's a little over 600 pages into it. And we hope to put it out in the coming year. But it's unparalleled, Mike, that you get this type of figure representing any modern religious group that openly publishes this kind of hatred.
All right, let's set the stage. Let's get into it. We're going to show some video here from your Q&A. But so you did a presentation last night at Barrington at the public library. Is that where it was?
Yes, beautiful
All right,
library.
it was sponsored by the Republican Town Committee of Barrington, Lisa Daft as the primary organizer. You had a pretty good crowd, right, for a week before Christmas and Hanukkah lecture, 60, 70 people?
Our friend Steve Scully said he did a head count and it came to 60, maybe 61.
All right, so you had that. Your presentation, what, maybe 60 minutes?
60 minutes, pretty close, exactly. Yeah, I didn't
All
go
right,
over 60
and
minutes.
was the crowd respectful during that 60 minutes?
Except for one woman who identified herself in the Q&A as a Muslim woman and was wearing a keffiyeh. She interrupted early on. We'll have that. We don't have that video yet. It's being worked
Yeah, we'll
on.
show it in a second. But so here's you speaking last night. Here's Lisa Daft, the organizer.
Well, this is after the event. I'm talking about there was actually an interruption by this girl during the presentation.
All right, but use the key word. This was a presentation where you were going to offer a Q&A. This was not billed as a debate, right?
Oh no, it wasn't a debate. Yeah, it was a lecture followed by question and answer.
Okay. Although many of the, as you'll see in the video, audience members want to debate you, and you reacted. All right. So let's look at. So first of all, I want to ask you this. Ahead of the presentation, did the letter from the rabbi, the open letter from the attorney, did any of that in any way change your thinking or what you presented or how you presented it? Did it have
No.
any impact on you at all?
No, I mean, I had a basic set of slides that I had put together by the time both of those letters were read, and I didn't change anything. I might have added a slide or two, but I didn't change anything.
All right, and your slides are pretty factual, just showing survey from any defamation league, and I assume you cited other sources as well?
Yeah, and I put them right before, I went to right before I gave the lecture. I put them all up on my website as a PDF that anyone could download.
All right. And you would say, and then just to be clear, you would say minimal, if not any, negative editorial commentary other than whatever people might glean from their own, infer from reading the data.
I would say basically none. And then the plea at the end
Okay.
was for reform.
All right, let's go to the video. So you open it up for a question and answer period. You're gracious enough to do that. Hold on, I think I shared the wrong thing here. Here we go. And you just got done answering one question, and then this one comes up.
Yes.
Hi, I'm deeply concerned about anti-Semitism, and I've had to work really hard at the university where I teach to create a safe environment for my students. And at the same time, I feel I have wasted an hour of my life listening to you cherry pick data to peddle hate.
Cherry pick data.
Cherry pick.
To peddle
Okay,
hate.
so Mike, what I want to do without going beyond limits and boring people to death is that I presented 17 slides starting from 2004 right up to the present, basically, on surveys. Again, many of them were ADL surveys, but there were additional non-ADL surveys, like the 2 slides I showed you from a think tank in Doha. But there were also data from what's known as a political pollster in the United States, Signal, about how U.S. Muslims reacted after October 7th, and frighteningly, 58% of them agreed that Hamas's carnage was justified in the United States. I referred to Canadian Muslim data, which dealt with a series of questions pertaining to anti-Semitism. And I'll just give you a quick, 42% of Canadian Muslims who were willing to offer an opinion felt that homicide bombing targeting Israeli civilians was justified.
Right.
And we
know you do your research. We know you do it. But let me ask you this.
It just went on and on.
Yeah, and we're going to show that exchange in just a second, because you push back pretty hard. You're not going to take that. You're not going to take those, those ad hominem attacks. But let me ask you this first.
Yeah.
If you're accused of being cherry picking data, that means there's other data out there that you ignored. Have in your research, have you seen other data that shows that the levels of anti-Semitism are not as high as you put forth in your presentation?
There are data that I gathered up all the data that I could find. There are differences, obviously, when you get outside the Middle East and North Africa, where the levels are extraordinarily high. The levels of anti-Semitism in Muslim communities that live outside the Middle East and North Africa tends, by and large, to be less. But when you look at multi-ethnic, multi-religious societies, what holds as a constant across all these surveys is the disproportionate Muslim anti-Semitism. So when you look at Europe, for example, and it's getting worse because there's such a large influx of Middle East, North Africa Muslims, the latest data out of France showed that 62% of the Muslims exhibited extreme anti-Semitism versus 15% of the Christians in France.
Wow.
And those data were ADL data published in 2023. And I mentioned, Mike, in this country, the only time it's been done, and I think, unfortunately, it's going to be much worse now, was 2017. And here, 34% of the Muslims exhibited extreme anti-Semitism versus 14% of U.S. non-Muslims. So it's always disproportionate. But absolutely, it's not going to be the levels, 90%, 85% that you see in the Middle East and North Africa, but it's always disproportionate.
All right, I want to let this exchange play out with this professor who we don't know who it is, who claims to be a professor from a university, so people can get a feel for, for both of you. Here we go.
No, excuse me. I'm not gonna, no, I'm sorry. You are finished.
She can have an opinion.
No.
It's not a
You have an ad hominem. I have an ad hominem. I haven't cherry picked anything.
debate. It's
I
not,
haven't
this is not a
cherry-picked
debate. We
anything.
answer questions.
Well, I
not a
guess so.
debate.
I have.
All right, that voice you hear there is Lisa Daft, the organizer, saying this is not a debate. This is a presentation. Ask a question, please.
I haven't cherry-picked anything. I'm giving you ADL data. I'm giving you data from a very respected think tank in Doha, when they're all saying the same thing. That's not cherry-picking, that's concordance. Okay? So if you don't understand the difference, then maybe you shouldn't be teaching. You shouldn't be teaching if you don't understand the difference.
Good line there, Andy. Very good.
Whoa, so, no, we're not debating you too.
If you
Oh,
don't
she's
listen
angry
to
at
me, I will
Lisa.
talk to you later.
This is a forum, if you, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, okay?
Yes, but I
This
can't
is,
finish
no,
mine.
no, you're having a
No, it's
debate,
just
we're
an
having,
comment.
this is your question. Yeah,
I would like to know her question.
So that's Lisa Daft. She's really saying, look, she's the event organizer. She shows some real leadership here, saying, look,
Absolutely.
it's not a debate. And I think as you're going to hear you say and she say coming up, ask a question. Don't throw out accusations and don't pontificate on your own, right? So let's keep it going. But Lisa Daft,
Mike, wait a second. We must have asked her 3 times to ask a question. And
yeah,
watch
you're going to
what
hear that coming up. We're going to hear that coming up right here. Here we go. Yep.
What is it? What is your question? Formulate a thoughtful, non-polemical, non-attack question. A question that I can answer with facts.
Yes, I'd like to finish that. May I finish it?
Now, I'd like to hear your question.
You did it before, you interrupted me.
No, I want to hear your question now.
Okay.
Right now. I don't want any more speeches. I want.
These people are so petulant. They got to get the last word in, Doc. I don't even want you to comment on it. That's just my comment. Here we go.
Question.
So I will say that everything that you have shown and said.
I will say that is not a question, Andy.
No, Mike. She has to accuse me once again of hate speech. If you let that play out, that's what she does. She accuses me of hate speech, but never a question.
Let's do it.
Hear your question now.
Okay.
Right now. I don't want any more speeches. I want a question.
So I will say that everything that you have shown and said in there fulfills the definition of hate speech, which is protected by.
That's not a question.
Let me finish
So
my question.
you represent the
We are most Sumerians. We are the descendants of Abraham.
Listen,
I don't know what this Tourette syndrome guy was doing there, Mike. I have no idea what this poor Tourette's kid was doing. I have no idea what that was about.
I don't know if it was Tourette's or autism. A lot of times when there's noise and conflict,
Well,
yeah.
It just, that was sad. I felt bad for that kid. I don't know what the story
Wow.
was.
Okay, all right, let's finish this up.
This bullshit. We are the first civilization.
Right,
I'm not,
that's not a
I'm not,
question.
so
I'm
listen,
sorry.
I'm not
That's
gonna tell
not a
her,
question.
this is not what this was about. So if people aren't gonna ask questions, then I will end the program, because this is about questions. You didn't ask
You didn't ask a question. I gave you an opportunity to ask my question.
I think I might be able to speak to this. Where is the line?
All right, so they jump, and this is not just in your event. This is to me, this is the left. They cannot engage
Right.
in civil commentary. It's even though it wasn't a debate in general, they can't. They just have to throw their barbs out there. They have to be petulant. They have to get their way, or else they become petulant. And she couldn't ask a question.
Exactly, Mike. That is the bottom line. That is the bottom line because there's a level of vacuousness. We cannot mince words here. The woman was not capable of formulating, an intelligent person who knows the subject area could formulate a question that I don't care if it's a gotcha question. That would be good. That would be good. That would show they have a mastery of the subject matter and they can trap me in some way. She's incapable of doing that.
Right. All right. Tell me if I'm wrong, but based on what she said, I'm a teacher at a university. I'm trying to protect the safety of my kids from anti-Semitism. It almost seems like she comes from the same ilk as that rabbi. I would guess that she was Jewish, but like the rabbi, they've got this sense of moral superiority where they believe you are some evil guy, hate-filled tirades against Islam, and she just can't tolerate it. but I would bet you she would, like the rabbi, was Jewish, and just had to get her digs in against you. Your thought on that?
I mean, that's plausible. I would like to know who she is and where she teaches.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. We'll ask
That's what
Lisa Daff if she knows.
I put her image out on Twitter. This was a public forum, and I asked people if they recognize who she is.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll find out at some point. All right.
Yeah.
Now, she wasn't the only one who wanted to
Oh, yeah.
pontificate and wanted to get a little, and it even goes beyond, as you'll see at the very end. So don't leave. It even goes beyond this question of Islam, Jewish anti-Semitism. It even goes into something much broader. So let's go back and let's now watch this second person. And right away, I think, right, Andy, viewers are going to know where this person's coming from. Here we go.
Yes.
I know we've mentioned.
So first visually, what do we see here?
Yeah, so she's wearing a keffiyeh around her neck, which is a Palestinian symbol, a pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas symbol that's become, quite chic, I guess. It's radical chic, Mike.
Yeah. So again, they're entitled to their, to believe whatever they want to believe and to their opinions and whatnot. But in this case, again, you're just asking people to ask a question. All right, so let's go. So now instantly you know where she's coming from. So let's see if she fits the image.
And I totally respect that you do not want this space to turn into a debate. I would guess I'm the only Muslim in this room. I grew up in Barrington, and I would just like to share my perspective, having lived in North Africa and the Middle East as well.
Okay. Do you have a question?
She wants to share her perspective. She wants to take the stage, and she wants to now lecture, right? That's not what the purpose of this was.
Right. She lives in Barrington. She's entitled to reserve that room and give a lecture. That's the way I look at it.
Just like you did. Right.
Yeah.
So, all right. So she asked you or Lisa, can I share my perspective on all this? Here we go.
Definitely going to be questions in here because I want
we'll ask one. Can you just ask one question, like everyone else?
In the name of democracy and in the name of democracy and community, I'd really like to be able to share my perspective.
I would like you to ask the question.
In the name of democracy?
I mean, it's just it's gobbledygook. But you know what it is, Mike? They're so privileged. They don't even understand that this is not how a lecture with a Q&A operates. That's not the decorum. They're supposed to formulate a thoughtful, maybe even probing and challenging question and ask it. But they're incapable of doing that, Mike, because they haven't been trained this way.
Yeah, I get you.
This is a little lecture.
I'm surprised you're not curious.
Have another lecture another day.
Again, the commentary from Lisa and others. This is not a debate. Ask a question, please.
It's not a debate. You may ask for questions other people who are
I really don't want to debate. After watching this, I would imagine a lot of people in this room are, having a lot of sentiments that they're really concerned about, the Muslim neighbors. And I don't think that that's fair, and that really scares me as a Muslim in this community.
I'm sorry you're scared. But
I didn't quite catch. What was she trying to say? She's scared about what, Andy? Just quickly.
She's scared about the grandmothers in the audience. I don't know what she's scared about. In other words, this is raising. I guess she would argue it's raising anti-Muslim hysteria by simply.
Well, she's gonna tell us at the very end of this what she's really afraid of. So
and yeah, well, that
just
too.
Just hold off a second.
if you have a question, I have to answer a question.
This is a presentation on data that was about anti-Semitism. So I
A lot
appreciate
of
that.
that data is on the ADL, which is known to be part of the Israeli lobby, which is
The ADL is part of the Israeli lobby. Is that what she said?
So Mike, again, and the other thing that's kind of disturbing is the inattentiveness. They're so wound up in their own worldview. What I showed clearly, and I had other examples, and I didn't want to bore people with them. What I showed is that the ADL for at least the past 20 years has deliberately suppressed and misrepresented their own data. and not highlighting this salient feature, which is that it's disproportionately a Muslim problem. The ADL's gone to great lengths to underplay that.
Like you said, to downplay their own data, right? All right, so I want to make a broader point here. This is why I'm doubly interested.
But there is this conspiracism in it too, Mike, which is alarming about the Zionist and Israeli lobby. You know, that tells you who she is.
Right. But this is vital for its face value. But I believe this is all symbolic of what the left has become in this country, no matter the topic, whether it's climate change, whether it's taxing the rich, whether it's January 6th. We have our narrative. We're going to stick to it. We're going to criticize anybody. We're going to shout down anybody. We're not going to listen to anything anybody else says that goes against that narrative. We're going to stick our heads in the sand. And even if it means we're going to keep losing elections nationally or wherever, we're not going to give up on the narrative no matter what. You are a white supremacist. You are an Islamic hate-filled bigot. That's who you are, Andy Bostom, no matter how you present any data. If you touch one of these sensitive topics and you're not part of their narrative, you are automatically the bad guy. You don't have to come if you don't want to, but
no, I absolutely, I think that's a very astute and very sad in its own way.
It is sad.
Yeah.
It is sad. We've invited people to come on the show. I will invite these people. I will invite that rabbi. I will invite this woman. I will invite that professor to come on and debate either with me or with you. But they won't come on the show. They won't. They don't want to do it on. They just want to throw accusations. All right, let's finish this up because this has a really tremendous ending.
The denouement. Yeah, the denouement.
Exactly. Here we go. Hold on. All right, now people start leaving because this is not why they came. They came to listen to a lecture and have a civil Q&A, so they start leaving.
I'd love, can you talk to me about the methodology? I'd love to hear about the methodology of those surveys.
If you pay attention, I can do that though. If you pay attention to
I'd love to talk about it. So let me ask you this right here, Andy, before we go back and finish up. If we can find out who that girl is, and she agrees to come on the show, would you have a back and forth with her?
Sure.
Okay, let's go back. I knew you would. You're not afraid. You're a civil guy.
what the ADL does, if you pay their population-based random digitile surveys, they're standard surveys. That's all they are.
Those surveys.
And they're not isolated.
Hold on, it's coming.
This feels really unfair, and I'm really scared as a Muslim in this community.
She's really scared as a Muslim. Now she's going to tell you what she's scared of.
I see a room of white people. I'm not hearing about a minority in this. Oh my God, that's the last question.
I see a room of white people who do not care about minorities. I see a bunch of white people in this room.
Yeah, that is pathetic. That is pathetic. And you know what? It's not just pathetic, Mike. That's too passive a way to characterize it. It's racist. It's racist.
Clearly.
I mean, they spray charges of racism willy-nilly at everybody else, and they never look inside and say, gee, maybe I've got some issues.
Let me ask you this. Try to step away from the emotion of it. Now, you pushed back pretty hard. I think you were justified in pushing back because it was not a debate. You should not stand up there and accept ad hominem attacks like that. I for one, kind of would have liked to have heard what that first woman's question was. It never got to that point. Would you have liked to have at least known what the question was?
I don't think there was one. I'll be honest.
Okay.
I really don't think there was one. But yes, I would have been more than happy. Let's say she stopped and said, she bit the bullet in her way of thinking and said, okay, I'm going to ask a question. And if she had finally asked a question, but you see, there was actually long pauses.
Right.
And she had finally asked a question. I would have answered it despite being sprayed with her charges of racism and everything, I would have answered her question.
All right. Would you say the room was of the 60 or so people that were there? And I know you can't tell by looking at people, but I don't know in conversations, would you say the room was largely made up of Jewish people?
There was a sizable Jewish contingency, yes, but
And
I would say maybe half.
okay. Now she said she thought she was the only Muslim in the room. Do you think that
she's
was
the only one who
true?
identified herself as a Muslim?
Right, okay.
No one else identified themselves as anything, by the way, Mike.
Now, as we saw, I'm the rabbi who wrote the letter to you, and I'm presuming, I might be wrong, I'm presuming that professor was Jewish. Not Jewish people don't want to hear this anti-Semitic data either because they have this kind of woke attitude about the world and about Palestinians and all that.
That's one major factor. The other thing is just raw fear.
Okay. So would you say the audience, once you probably couldn't tell during your lecture because people were sitting there, I assume, except for that one outburst you talked, were pretty civil. But based on the reactions to the Q&A, would you say the room was largely supportive of you, or like these questioners, the two we showed, were not supportive?
I think the two were outlying. I think the overall sentiment was supportive.
Of just hearing the facts.
Yeah, that's what Lisa told me. I mean, in other words, I think a number of people did come up to me, but I think even more people came up to Lisa to thank her for holding the lecture.
Good. Good.
So I would say between those two anecdotal pieces of evidence, the preponderance of the people there supported the presentation and were informed, which is the basic purpose of it all.
All right, last question. Again, taking a look back, trying to look at it from a 30,000-foot view. What happened. There was a little pre-event controversy. You did your presentation. There was a little post-presentation controversy with those questioners. If you take a broader community look, this is all centered in Barrington. What do you think? You said your goal was to just raise awareness. You were invited to this Barrington. What do you think? Do you think you helped your cause? Do you think this event ended up hurting it, not by any fault of your own? What do you think the impact of this event will have in that community or in our state?
Yeah, I'm not sure, honestly. I'm glad that, it just stayed at the level of, verbal exchanges that got a little bit heated. But to me, the important point was to show, particularly the Jews that happened to attend this lecture, that the data are there. We need to start not only looking at them, but sharing them so that we can approach this problem of anti-Semitism. Mike, I didn't mention this, but I started off with the medical principle of triage, where you deal with the most serious condition first, regardless. In this case, it was formulated, by a Napoleonic era field surgeon. And in those days, if a nobleman, as I pointed out, if a nobleman had a flesh wound, but a commoner, an infantryman, was dying, was hemorrhaging out on the battlefield, the nobleman was treated first. So the principle of triage applies to many things. You deal with the most serious problem first. And if the polling data are telling us for the last quarter century that Muslim anti-Semitism is the most common and virulent form, then you deal with that first.
All right, and we deal with it because it has mortal consequences. Exactly. Wars are being fought, terrorist attacks are being waged, counterattacks by Israel. People by the tens of thousands are dying because of this anti-Semitic beliefs that you've documented, right? Really, that's the bottom line, right? It's not just Republican or Democrat. This has consequences. This anti-Semitism has mortal, horrific,
and it's being preached in U.S. mosques. I went to some length to show that this is a tragedy, and I think it's potentially an avoidable tragedy. That because Mike, the mosques are not being called out.
Yeah.
Because if you call them out, you're an Islamophobe.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't know if you make this point in your lecture, and I don't know that we've made it when I've had you on this show before, but it just dawned on me as we were wrapping up here. This is not just an academic lecture. This,
No.
with no consequences. Oh, well, let's just debate or listen or present. This has mortal, real life manifestations to it, and it's why it's important. When you say it has to be dealt with, it has. If we want to reduce all these deaths, we've got to reduce this level of anti-Semitism. It's that simple, right?
Absolutely. And in the Q&A, I had deliberately, reserved the slide. I had additional, materials, but including from mosques. And I just went back this morning, Mike, to make sure that this is accurate. And I did a script and put the text into a Google Translate, which is actually getting very good at Arabic now. At the end of this sermon that was given in the Kansas City Islamic Center on November 15, 2024, this is what was said in Arabic, of course, only in Arabic, but it's there, and it's still up. You can still see it on their YouTube channel. Oh Allah, annihilate the criminal Zionists, those of whom are Zionists and those who are not. Oh Allah, count them, kill them one by one, and do not spare a single one of them, for they are no match for you. Oh Allah, allow us, torment them with your own hands, humiliate them, grant us victory over them, and heal the hearts of the believers. This is sitting on a website for the Kansas City Islamic Center,
Wow.
and it's still out there. And now I made very clear, this is not coming from the Quran. This is not coming from the traditions of Muhammad, but this is religious-based incitement coming out of a U.S. mosque, unchallenged.
Yeah, based fully on anti-Semitism, which proves the whole point of your lecture. Dr. Andrew Bostom, thank you. Very insightful. Thank you for your courage. Thank you to Lisa Daft for her courage, right?
Absolutely, thanks to Lisa.
Yeah,
Wouldn't have happened without Lisa, Mike. Wouldn't have happened without Lisa.
Well, she invited you. She withstood the attack from the rabbi. She kept the meeting on. Then she defended the process of the meeting, which was not to turn it into a wild debate, but to try to keep it to a civil lecture with questions and answers. So she gets a lot of credit for this. You get a lot of credit. Look, you push back, you got a little emotional, but you had every right to. When they start throwing ad hominem.
Tell my wife that, Mike.
All right, we'll tell your wife that. I'd like to meet her someday. I don't think I have. But hey, Dr. Bossom, thank you very much. Again, a happy Hanukkah to you and yours. And
Merry Christmas to you and yours, Mike.
Yeah, and to you, our viewers, God bless for a blessed holiday season and a great 2025. So until our next episode for In the Dugout, Mike Stenhouse out. We'll see you guys next game.